Hello, everybody. Welcome back to the City Till We Die podcast, episode number 4. Unfortunately, I think we're going to be covering much of the same themes as we have on every other one of the episodes thus far. But another point on the road for Norwich City on Saturday. That unbeaten Championship away record is maintained, but just about they scraped through that with another battling performance, if you want to caveat it that way. Or there's all the problems that maybe we've discussed that we're going to get into again. Adam joined by Ben Ambrose as per usual. Yeah, I guess the place to start then is that Stoke game, 1-1 draw. Not as bad as Coventry, maybe, as much as the statistics and metrics don't make for great reading. However, I would argue it was a slight improvement on Wrexham at home. Obviously, the result in isolation is, but the performance just about. Where was your kind of feeling? I suppose off the back of that game.
First and foremost, I'd like to say I wish we were talking about another fantastic away performance from the weekend, but sadly this isn't a golf podcast and we can't talk about Europe's display in the Ryder Cup. We seem to have chosen this world of talking about Norwich City, which to me is bizarre, but here we are. Much improved, yeah. I feel like I've got quite a jovial tone there. Let me just bring it down a bit just to reflect more how I feel. Yeah, it was better than Wrexham, obviously. It was, for me, a little bit better than Coventry, but as you say, it's hard fought, and my gut feeling is I don't think you can really dispute the effort levels from Norwich. I don't think it's going to be a case of we're sat here talking about how Norwich have given up and thrown the towel in this. It's not going to be that. It's just, again, it's boring Norwich City. It's so dull. It's so difficult to watch. And the only thing, the thing I take from this game is it's probably given us that opportunity to see Norwich in full flow at their best. That goal for me was outstanding. It was the standard to which we should be holding Norwich City, but also it gives them the chance for the upcoming game on Wednesday to basically go and do it again and again and again. And for as much as I'm sure we will be quite, I don't want to say negative and pessimistic, but realistically, that's kind of where we are as Norwich fans. But it gives us that opportunity to look for something against West Brom. We aren't going to be going to Carrow Road thinking, right, God, here we go again. We'll be going to Carrow Road thinking, right, can we recreate that goal against Stoke? Can we alleviate the concession of possession, conceding of possession with possession of our own, but not just possession of our own, but meaningful possession? And yeah, it gives us that measuring stick, which is my desperate attempt to be positive. But yeah, I'm feeling okay. I'm slowly becoming numb to it, but in the grand scheme of things, it wasn't too bad, was it?
No, I say I sort of, in the post-game reaction spoke maybe about the statistics and Stoke having over 20 efforts on goal comparatively to Norwich's just 6. But, you kind of look at those opportunities in isolation, a little bit similar, I guess, to some of the other games where, I don't think Stoke necessarily carved out loads of, clear-cut opportunities, but they're still getting shots away and Norwich having to almost be backs against the wall and not really creating a lot going forward. So I suppose, how do they maybe turn that dial sort of in their own favour and start to create more opportunities? Because it's not a comfortable watch. Watching maybe this approach at the moment where they're having to sit deep and defend all game.
It's really tricky because, and this is the discussion we've been having, isn't it? Where this kind of away performance is acceptable and almost to be expected in the Championship, providing you win at home, providing you provide that more entertaining side at home. This kind of performance for Norwich, I think against Stoke was, largely I put it down to the goal, but one of their better ones, because there was a couple of chances where Norwich actually looked pretty sharp. It's not just the goal, but it's the move that Kenny McLean started. It was a very quick move, but that Liam Gibbs chance where he hit the bar, it's just, I don't know. I don't know how they, specifically, I don't know how they turn the performance levels around. All I want to sit here and say is, look, can we recreate that goal? Can we recreate that style of possession where everyone gets involved? Your midfielder is at the heart of it, and we'll obviously speak about the lineup, but how do we base every time we have the ball around certain patterns of play. How do we give ourselves a little bit of identity? Identity is something that we really lack at the moment. What we're becoming known for is silly mistakes. What we are really known for amongst Norwich City fans at the moment is just giving the ball away and conceding silly goals and conceding a lot of chances, not just silly goals, but again, as you mentioned, over 20 shots conceded away from home. The word that we often use is sustainability. How sustainable are your performances in terms of achieving anything? For us at the moment, if Norwich continue to play like that, the law of averages dictates we're going to start getting battered away from home. And yeah, I look at West Brom as that opportunity to. And we said the same against Wrexham. It's not just about a win; it's about leaving Carrow Road happy. It's about leaving Carrow Road having seen the Norwich City side. I don't want to say totally dominate the ball because things don't just get fixed overnight, but a Norwich City side that have carved out a few more chances than what they have been so far this season, which, to be honest with you, the bar is pretty low. That shouldn't be too hard to do, but it's just about, I mean, Liam Manning is about as vague as I am, which is slightly worrying, but it's about being braver. It's about having more personality. And Norwich City have signed some very good footballers. We can have the debate, and we will continue to have the debate about how the squad has been assembled and how these transfers actually play into the hands of Liam Manning and how he wants Norwich City to look. We can talk about that until the cows come home. But as individuals, I want to put a bit more onus onto them, not just Liam Manning, to just be better at football, if that makes sense. That feels like some very broad points there, but it's frustrating. It really is.
It certainly is, yeah. And you mentioned sort of new signings. I know Torp during the week in his last press conference announced the news of Diallo being out injured, and that's obviously another huge blow on top of all the other injuries that seem to be piling up at the moment. But he spoke maybe about the need for change. I guess some of those signings you mentioned that maybe hadn't been up to the level required over the course of some of the other previous games. He made that sort of twist, I guess, on Saturday. We saw the likes of Liam Gibbs get his first opportunity in the starting 11. We saw Makama get his first start as well, which clearly, a player that we've spoken around on recent podcasts, and maybe the impact he's been having off the bench. And those individuals I felt were pretty good and deserved their opportunities and probably took it.
Yeah, the squad itself has, and I know it's kind of cursed with injuries at the moment, but the squad itself doesn't look too bad. And we spoke, as you said, about Makama, and we looked for reasons to be hopeful. We looked for that little spark of energy. We looked for that little spark of quality. And Gibbs and Makama, as you said, came in, and the goal from Makama is really good. Why he got hooked at halftime, it's not one that I'm going to cry about, but for me, it's another little decision from Liam Manning where I'm thinking, come on, man, like what are you trying to do here? But watching that first half, I was pleased with Makama. He did cause Cresswell some problems, but I also think he could learn a lot of valuable lessons from that. Cresswell is sort of vintage EFL. He's a veteran in this league, and the way he played against Makama, he's way smaller and physically, like, less able, if you know what I mean, because Makama is 6'4" and so powerful. But Cresswell will have taught him a few lessons in terms of how to read the game and how to get the better of your man, no matter their size, which for me is a positive thing. How that translates going forward, hopefully more goals, hopefully causing a few more defenders issues, which based off the evidence so far, yeah, Makama is looking like a good player. Gibbs, I think Gibbs for me, he started off really well at Norwich, didn't he? And then it kind of tailed off as he became a player that I don't think he knew what he was. I don't think Thorpe really knew what he was. I don't think Wagner really knew what he was. Dean Smith maybe had a bit of a clue, which feels bizarre to say, doesn't it? But I don't really look at his performance necessarily on the weekend to make a comment on. I look at the shape that Norwich City had. He sort of ended up top, which clearly is like it's a style thing. It's the way Manning wanted to set up. But I'm looking at it just thinking again, like, oh, Liam Manning seems to have found himself up front, which I guess when you want to press and you want to have a bit of energy and intensity, he's your man because he has bags of that. But the wider decision to make that call, I don't know, just a bit confusing to me, Adam.
Yeah, while we're talking about midfielders, I felt Pelle Matson was another standout performer in Saturday's game. The pass for Stacey for the opener, and just kind of what he provided again from a technical skill set in that midfield. He just looks like a really accomplished player who clearly Norwich have done, a lot of the groundwork over the summer and previous years, sort of looking at him as an individual and how he might fit a system or a manager at Norwich. And feels like a player that maybe Torp would have benefited from as well. You look at kind of him as a profile of a midfielder versus maybe some of the players that Torp had at his dispense, last year, and the likes of Slimani, who, has been frozen out a little bit now and has picked up an injury, as was announced in today's press conference this afternoon. So I guess, it's fun. Well, it's difficult because he's almost the kind of player that I think Norwich would have thrived on last year in a Torp system, because he's proven that in a Manning system this year.
Yeah, the point I made earlier about players being more creative and being a bit braver, that works when you have a manager to sort of to pair that with. When you have a head coach who's instructing you to do this, and the head coach's job is to bring that out of you. At the moment, we are having to cling to individual qualities, and you're completely right to mention Matson and how him and Thorpe potentially could have worked, because Thorpe clearly was very good at designing a team that could score goals, that could play on the front foot. We can talk about the fragilities, we can talk about why he got sacked, but one thing is for sure, and that is he designed a team to score a lot of goals, and he did it with the likes of Benana Slimani. And I don't want to sort of berate him or anything like that. And the irony to that is that Manning has said that his performances in training were almost pushing for a place in the team after being completely frozen out. But I just look back and breathe a sort of a sigh of what if, at the idea that if you had given someone like Topic, someone like Matson to Thorpe, what could he have done in his second season? I think until things maybe start going right for Carrow Road, that'll be the thought very prevalent in my mind. But I mean, it's great, isn't it? The goal that we scored, and for all the points I mentioned in terms of it gives us that measuring stick. But it's just so frustrating to watch. It was a fantastic goal, and I don't think it was that hard to achieve. And I can say that as someone who plays football on a Thursday night. I play Thursday sevens. I'm not special in any way, shape, or form, but watching it and knowing Norwich City, it really feels like a goal that they should be producing. Which, okay, they have. Can they do it again? That really is the question, or will it prove to almost be in spite of what Manning is telling them? But you look at the combinations for that goal where Matson was almost just sort of getting the ball, giving it, giving it, and Sarge dropped deep, showed his qualities as an all-round striker. Ball goes out wide. Stacey showed his qualities, flying forward, nice ball in, Makama finish. I'm just like, guys, why can't we do this more often? And I don't. I think I don't know whether that is. I'm really struggling here. I don't know whether that is Manning designing that move, or whether it is almost players just desperate to be creative. That is purely based off the sample of what we've seen from Norwich City so far, because I really don't think we've seen many moves like that, especially in these. You think of those opening home games where Manning actually was impressed with the first 25-30. Norwich weren't pulling moves together like that. So I kind of wonder what lessons are being learned and where. So we'll see. It's just, yeah, it's really frustrating, and I just really hope Norwich can start doing it on a more consistent basis.
Yeah, I think one of my frustrations is just how isolated Josh Sargent looks at the moment in that sort of attacking, sort of striking area where you want him to be provided service and score goals, because you look at kind of his goals over the course of this season thus far, it's not really been because he's been put anything on a plate. He's had to almost do it for himself. And I kind of look at Saturday as another example of that. That ball that you mentioned that Stacey played across from Makama, that's what we need to see more of, I think, moving forwards, because clearly with Josh Sargent or Makama at the end of it, that Norwich are going to score goals, and this system could potentially start to have a little bit more, I guess, positive outcome. At the moment, it feels like we're talking so much about that defensive problems that Norwich have in the fragilities and maybe the system and how negative the approach feels, and that sort of reaction, I guess, we got on social media again on Saturday about the approach and the way that Norwich had to battle and, didn't really necessarily warrant the point they got. It's kind of back to the walls as we said at the start. I mean, how do they, I guess, go about, I kind of mentioned this a little bit earlier, trying to get Sargent more involved in games. I mean, Sienats is a prime example. You mentioned that change for Makama at halftime. Again, didn't really offer too much. So, yeah, that's kind of, I guess, the areas where Norwich maybe need to improve if they're going to get more points and more wins on the road.
Yeah, I completely agree, and I don't look at what you've asked there is how do we get more out of Sargent, and I don't think that just has to be goals. We have seen enough of Josh Sargent to know that actually he can link the play. He's a very strong centre forward, and as was proven against Stoke, he can be involved in the making of a goal. I think it's just how do we utilise Sargent in both ways. I don't think it has to be about how can we get Sargent in the box to score the goal. I think it has to be about how can we get someone there, because we have that plethora of talent, like Makama again, as an example. And I mean, Liam Gibbs, if he wants to wander up front again, sure. But it needs to be how can we get the ball in the box for someone to finish. I don't think we want to be independently relying on Josh Sargent. We want to be a well-rounded team. And, I think another thing is, can Norwich City get off a few more long shots? And that is just another form of applying pressure in a match. I'm not saying go crazy with it. I'm not saying let's go back to the Alex Tetty days of screaming shoot every time our central midfielder has a ball. I'm just thinking, how can we attack? How can we be more creative? How can we get goals from other areas of the pitch? And again, this is where Norwich need to find a system and almost stick with it, because where this chopping and changing keeps happening, the players can't have like a foundation. They can't look at a certain area of a pitch and think, right, we can do that there, which then either creates that or creates that. With all these constant changes, it's almost like a problem for them to solve each game. And consistency in football is so hard to achieve. But from a positive sense, when you have it, boy, do we know how useful it can be. And we've seen that with Norwich City teams under Daniel Farke at its very best. We've seen it with Thorup as recently as last season, in terms of sort of knowing what you're getting and knowing what you can go for going forward. So I don't think it's how do we try and get more goals out of Sargent. I think it's how do we get him involved in the play more. And I don't mean in our box with clearing headers. I don't mean that at all. It's about how can we create more chances and score more goals. And I mean, boy, that is really as simple as it is for Norwich City at the moment.
Yeah, clearly a lot of this podcast is probably going to be more looking forward than back, because, a lot of these problems we've discussed in depth in recent podcasts. But I think, look at that sort of chances that Norwich conceding now, and it is a high volume predominantly over all of the games thus far this season. And I mean, it's kind of, I think, natural in the EFL, opportunities are, basically on a plate, left, right and centre for most teams. But how do Norwich, I guess, start to bring that number down? Because clearly if they can bring that number down and not give away as many opportunities to teams, then there is that chance to, I guess, bring that goals conceded record down. And then, with sort of the firepower that we've mentioned there, and trying to create more opportunities, good opportunities that they did in certain elements on Saturday, and that Makama goal is a prime example of that. Then naturally, I think moving forwards, that would be a better formula for Norwich to try and, get more points on the board.
Well, when they know what they're aiming for, and that's as specific as I want to be, when they know what they're aiming for, when they're in possession of the ball, that is how we will stop conceding such a high volume of chances. Because horseshoe football can be quite effective if you know what you're being patient towards, if that makes sense. Like if you're holding on to the ball and you know what the plan is, eventually it's almost not wasting possession. It's just buying time. It's assessing very quickly in the moment how the opposition line up in that specific moment. It gives you that opportunity to assess, right, how can I get the ball out wide onto the left? How can I get it out wide onto the right? How can I get Matson involved to then give it to Sarge down the middle, whatever. That is where horseshoe football can actually be quite effective, and it can reduce the pressure. It can almost tire out the opposition. I remember when David Wagner sort of went into his first full season, we saw that pre-season, didn't we, where Shane Duffy would stand on the ball, and the narrative was, oh, they're baiting the press, which it felt a bit silly and a bit boring at the time, but actually I think the logic of it was completely sound. You can bait that press in the Championship, and teams specifically at the moment will be looking at Norwich as a chance to get 3 points. They'll be looking at Norwich as quite fragile in possession, so I'm sure they'll be more encouraged to press more than ever before. So on the ball, Norwich just need to have some sort of creative direction so that when they are holding on to it, it doesn't turn into a Mirko Topic versus Middlesbrough, where he plays a silly pass and all of a sudden everyone's like, oh my God, what's happening here? It can be a case of, right, okay, if we're going to hang on to the ball, if we're going to pass it between the centre backs and the midfielder's going to come back and have a neat little touch and then turn out, if they can know what they're aiming for or have a few ideas in the locker, then we will see an increase of chances for Norwich. We'll see an increase in goals, but we'll also see hopefully that 25 shots reduce, because I know possession isn't everything, as we know, but that's kind of my solution. And the goal against Stoke is a prime example of it working at its best. And what I'm really hoping is, and we'll get onto defensive fragilities in a moment, because I mean we have to talk about it again. But what I'm really hoping is that Liam Manning has this clip and he says, lads, look, this, I'm not going to say we have to try and recreate that goal sort of pass for pass every time, but here's what we can do if when we get the ball and have the opportunity to break, here's how clever we can be. Here's how we can create a chance using Sargent for someone else. That is sort of my take on that. And yeah, I mean, the opportunity this team has afforded itself feels like one we've not seen so far this season, because this is the first, I don't want to call it a proper goal because that would feel quite harsh, but this is the first decent goal in open play that we've scored. And in my brain, for as much as I'm sick and tired of watching Norwich just get slapped about, I'm thinking, right, can we go and do that? Like we've shown for one goal that we're capable of it. Can we go and do that again and again and again on Wednesday, but also going forward?
Yeah, you mentioned the defensive fragilities. I mean, it was an expected goals of 1.85 on Saturday, which is obviously a vast improvement maybe from that last away performance against Coventry. And I look at maybe some of the opportunities that Stoke carved out. Kovacevic having to sort of foil Junho Bay before Medic sort of cleared it before it trickled over the line. There was Manhoff hitting the post as well in the second half. They had a few other opportunities as well, good opportunities at different points. But clearly, you look at some of the games upcoming, which of course we'll go into a little bit more depth as we move forward in this podcast. How do Norwich go about addressing it? That's quite a difficult question to ask, but clearly, I guess I look at some of the players as well. Maybe the amount of changes he's making in this squad as well. I think it's only really Darlin, Medic, Kovacevic, and maybe Sargent who have featured in all of the last 3 games in September. Because some of that's injury, related, and clearly he's had to make changes in those departments, but I think, that lack of maybe rhythm and stability in terms of a starting 11 probably plays into it a little bit, but maybe as well that the wider system and a lot of that reaction on Saturday was around that negative approach again, that fans feel that man is maybe starting to sort of bleed, I think, into this Norwich City team.
Yeah, I think the first question needs to sort of be, when Norwich City are training, when they're designing how they want their defence to look and how they want to prevent goals, the first question is like, why are we so slow to react to everything? That sort of Vlad smothering you mentioned, which then led to Medic clearing one off the line. What really annoys me about that is the nature of just the way they just completely ball watched. And it's a recurring theme. It's not just like it's a one-off and it's a lapse in concentration. It's not just like, oh, Norwich have done this once and you almost think they'll just shake it off and move on. It's a recurring theme. We saw it against Wrexham for their equaliser, where the defence are just ball watching. It's 50-50 for me. I don't want to sit and just completely slag off Liam Manning and his coaching staff. The centre backs and I mean the defence as a whole, they need to react quicker. It's a quality issue. I don't quite know. I'm not a football coach myself. I don't really know how, other than by just telling them to use their heads. I don't quite know how you get that reaction out of them, but it's the task of the coaches to challenge and to teach those centre backs. When I say those centre backs, I mean Darling and Medic, to be a little bit quicker. Darling is fantastic. We know that. Big Vlad, phenomenal. Medic has shown some quality, but also been a bit stinky at times. They need to consistently provide that wall. And it feels harsh to say that after, the Coventry display and the fact that actually against Stoke, it was quite resolute for as many chances as we did concede. It feels harsh to almost be criticising them. But again, you asked the question earlier, didn't you? How do we stop the volume of chances? Just be switched on. Just be awake and alert. I can't be more specific than that, because as a fan watching it, I'm just thinking, like, use your heads, guys. Just stop doing this on such a regular basis. That's all I've got for how to fix the defence. I mean, boy, do I hope that Manning has a bit more than me, but it's incredibly. I don't have any other words other than annoying and frustrating. It's becoming tedious just watching Norwich City defend like that at times. And I mean, if they can nip that in the bud on a more consistent basis, I think that then gives them a better platform to hold on to the ball and to just stop conceding such a high volume of chances. Because earlier in the season, I appreciate we are still very early in the season, the underlying data pointed towards Norwich City and conceding goals. It's coming to fruition, and I can't imagine the numbers look any prettier. So, I mean, fingers crossed that in training this week. And I think it's almost good that they have that game on a Wednesday to very quickly try and bounce back and put the sessions from Monday, Tuesday in to try and rectify it. Because at the moment we've been having to wait a week, haven't we? Which, I mean, that's just clutching at straws.
Yeah, Wednesday feels like a big game. But before we talk about that, obviously the nominees for the September Player of the Month are out there. Norwich winless in this month. There's been some solid performances from certain individuals. Those in contention are Vladan Kovacevic, Harry Darling, Jack Stacey, and Jovan Makama. I sort of think back to Harry Darling maybe in his performance against Coventry. I know that he conceded that sort of error, I guess, that led to the equaliser so late on, and so frustratingly, if Kovacevic has had a pretty good month, you can sort of look at that Wrexham game, and that could have been easily 5-6 goals comfortably if it wasn't for some of his saves in that game. And Stacey, has scored a goal, provided the assist on Saturday. Makami, I think we spoke quite heavily there in terms of his positive impact. So where's your head at, I guess, in terms of who's maybe been that star player in this winless September run?
It's got to be Vlad for me. Not to be sort of too much of a negative Nancy, but it's really concerning and signifies an unpleasant trend when your goalkeeper is the clear winner of a Player of the Month award. We've gone from Josh Sargent absolutely banging them in and clearly just establishing himself as the best player in the Championship to, oh wow, our goalkeeper has kept us in a lot of games. That is the sign of a team that really needs to sort it out in front of him. But to not be too negative about Norwich for a second, I think Vlad has been immense. He clearly was a player who is very confidence based, and I think that Portsmouth game was really important for him, and actually showing that he can command his box and he can be brave and he can make some really really athletic saves. And he's a massive upgrade on the last season Angus Gunn. I was a big fan of Angus Gunn before last season sort of happened, but I go back to that question of my mind of just thinking, imagine if Thorup had Vlad in goal, which I'll try not to dwell on too much, but he's been phenomenal, and I enjoy having him in goal. As a footballer who wants to feel connected to, as a football fan who wants to feel connected to his team, players like Vlad and I'll chuck Harry Darling in there as well, make me feel connected to them. You can feel the personality. This isn't an issue at Norwich City where players don't care, as I mentioned earlier. It's a structural issue. It's a football issue, and yeah, big credit and big props to Vlad, who I hope never is up for the award again, for all the right reasons.
Yeah, I'd have to agree. I think, there was a lot of maybe conversation around when he arrived at the football club and some of those other goalkeepers that maybe Norwich were supposedly targeting, and he maybe wasn't the most popular choice. And I think he's maybe starting to sort of close a few of those mouths that were sort of maybe a few concerns around him, because some of those performances he's put in so far this season, and just that connection, as you mentioned. I remember being at Blackburn, and I know that was the last win, and it's a lot easier to maybe feel connected after a win, but just watching him kind of celebrate on the pitch and come straight back out again and almost do another celebration. It is those kind of moments and those individuals that make you connect with individuals within that group and the whole team as a collective. And that can often be the springboard to create something special. You look at that sort of Farker team in 18-19, it didn't start very well, and there was clear structural problems there. You look at that Leeds home game where they lost 3-0, and it was pretty grim watching, and you think, okay, where's this going? But again, that squad had individuals that fans wanted to believe in and get excited around. And there is quality within this group. And I think if they can display that quality in a system that's structurally set up to work, then I think there could be some excitement around the corner, even though it doesn't feel like that at the moment. And it feels a long way off. But of course, we've got to stay patient. And Wednesday is where we're going to look to now. That home crowd yet to see a win, Ben. 4 straight defeats in all competitions at Carrow Road, and clearly off the back of some of those recent away performances, and we spoke around some of the problems that the Norwich have had in those games. What do Norwich fans need to see, I guess, this week? There's 2 massive games, and the game on Sunday feels slightly different, and one I'm trying to block out of my mind for the time being. But Wednesday, what do we need? Obviously, the performance is key, the result is key, but what do we need to see as a wider sort of, I guess, perspective on the game sitting here now? Because as much as 3 points is crucial, it feels like the game needs more than that. It needs a performance, and it needs that home crowd to see something to cling on to.
What Norwich City fans need to see is a Liam Manning side that match the words he continues to speak in these press conferences. I really don't sort of sit and you know how you've had managers in the past, maybe like a Dean Smith or a David Wagner, where you're like, oh my God, he's deluded. What do you mean that was a good performance? I mean, we had that a little bit for me at the beginning of the season, but I don't actively sit there and think that the guy is so sort of self-deluded in what he's doing. I think he very clearly sees the same thing we do. I feel like the issues that he recognizes are the same as what we've been consuming. I want to see a Norwich City team that do what he says they should do, which is be braver, be bolder, be a bit more creative. Again, his sort of style of presser is very different to Thorup and Afaka, where it felt more tactical and it felt more, right, here's how we're going to do this, which is fine. It's just how a lot of football managers now are coded. But I need to leave Carrow Road having seen a Norwich City team be creative, but not just that, not clumsy. And I appreciate that in Championship football, individual errors are a given. Conceding chances is inevitable. That's fine. You've got to just reduce the volume massively. And I just want to see some goals. I just want to see Norwich City score some goals and think, wow, that was good. I don't even know what the bar for success is at this point. I've mentioned that the Stoke goal has given us that measuring stick, and it's given us that chance to see Norwich and what they can do. But as a fan at the moment, I don't really know what I want, and that for me is how you breed dissonance from a football club. It's how you breed that feeling of, oh, we're back at Carrow Road again. That feeling of feeling quite lethargic and just not really caring. I'm not there yet. Last season did make me care again. And that came from, for example, to go back to last season, I remember the Sheffield Wednesday draw at home, the Blackburn draw at home, and leaving those games, despite them finishing as draws, a 1-1 and a 2-2, despite leaving those games. I remember the Sheffield United one specifically, just to go on a tangent about that, because it was absolutely hammering it down. And we'd drawn 2-2 against a team that I really dislike. But I still felt like Norwich had shown some real quality. That feeling in my stomach is what I want leaving Carrow Road. I think that'll be much easier to achieve because of how low I feel about it at the moment. But yeah, that's what Norwich fans need to see. They need to see a Norwich City team that backs the words that Liam Manning continues to speak. I don't know how you feel, Adam.
Yeah, I can't really think that Norwich fans want to see that sort of feeling of discontentment, I guess, that we saw after that Wrexham game. Just a performance where there was absolutely nothing on show to cling on to in terms of positives. Every single fan who, some of which had spent, I know I had bought a ticket, just for the game, £38. Even the season ticket holders, we can speak about the prices of season tickets and what Norwich fans at home are paying to see their team, and maybe what the product on the pitch is like at the moment, irrespective of the results. I think, if you, as you say there, performances are really positive and fans are starting to see things that they think, okay, yeah, this could potentially lead to really good results and a team that's exciting to watch at Carrow Road. At the moment, we've seen absolutely nothing of that. And that clearly is a problem and something that I think makes Wednesday, absolutely massive under the lights at Carrow Road. That sort of evening kickoff feeling that often sort of brings around with these games. It's a big opportunity. And clearly, you look at some of the injuries that Manning mentioned again today. No sort of first team players as such missing for this game. I know he mentioned updates on Shane Duffy and Anis Ben Slimani, but he also mentioned again those uncomfortable conversations which we're not privy to in terms of at Colney and what's sort of being said and who to. I mean, who I guess would maybe Manning be referencing and maybe what would be part of those conversations and sort of the form that they would take in your eyes? I mean, I say it's a difficult question because we're not in the building and not there to listen to them.
What, injuries or quality-wise? You mean injuries?
Yeah, injuries and quality-wise, yeah.
I mean, it's an interesting discussion, isn't it? We, as you say, we can't give any sort of certain answer. We can only be just fans and speculate. And guess what? That's fine. That's why we're a fan channel. I don't know, but someone needs to answer the questions very quickly because it's becoming a recurring theme, isn't it? And I know there's that sort of upwards trend, isn't there, of volume of injuries and sort of the like the ACLs and the muscular injuries. And I just, as a fan watching it, you're almost just like, what the hell are they doing? Because it really doesn't feel like this time, say 5 years ago, to complete lie, let's push it back more, 7, 8 years ago, it really doesn't feel like we were having these discussions of, hang on a minute, what are the players doing? What are they eating? Is it something in the food? Like, if anyone took that seriously, that really wasn't serious. I don't know, but it's fascinating. And what's more fascinating to me is Liam Manning pointing out that they need to have uncomfortable conversations because typically, and I spoke about it, didn't I, the way football managers are coded and they're very media trained, that's not a very media trained thing to say. So I would like to think, yeah, conversations have been had, but boy, I'm curious to know what those conversations are and who gets the blame for what, and are we overworking the players, which is, it feels bizarre almost because they don't look overworked. They look very tired early on in games, which I wouldn't associate with a team who are being maybe I would associate that with a team being sort of overworked. I mean, in games they definitely don't look it, but I don't know, mate. It's a bizarre one, and I don't think it's going to change anytime soon, to be quite frank with you.
Yeah, it's interesting. I sort of remember Ben Napper's comments, I think, when he was asked about it sort of last February time in maybe an interview with the Pinkin, and sort of he spoke kind of about maybe not feeling too many concerns around sort of some of that sports science department and sort of the injuries and the problems that Norwich are having. And, it's not really, related to sort of workload or whatever, but the fact that they've recruited a whole different group of individuals, and you can sort of look at some of their maybe history, I guess, at previous clubs and question the recruitment and maybe whether these players have got a history of injuries, but also I think you can question those individuals in the Norwich building at the moment who sort of head up all of that data and kind of workloads of players and maybe the injuries they're picking up, because they're not all related to sort of on-field injuries and contact injuries like some, they seem to be recurring, I guess, for things that are happening maybe during the week in training or workload issues. And that's clearly, I guess, an issue that Norwich have got to get to the bottom of, because it's going to cost them at some point. And clearly at the moment they're lacking, I guess, the likes of Chris Gordon, who was starting to show that positives, I guess. I know that was an injury that was picked up in a game scenario, but clearly there's other individuals. Diallo, have they played him too much for a player who's stepping into England for the first time? A lot of questions that we obviously don't know the answers to, but seem to be a topical part of conversation in these sort of podcasts, or anyone who speaks to Norwich fans. They seem to always bring up that same sort of area of conversation. Let's talk a little bit about West Brom, because clearly they're the next opponent at Carrow Road, 8th in the table at the moment. 6 points on their travels so far from 3 games this season. A few sort of quality players in that group. I really like Isaac Price, the midfielder they brought in. I think it was last January. The lad who I think he was at Everton and then went to Liège and really done well in Belgium and seems to have found his feet in this West Brom team. Clearly they had that change of manager as well. Ryan Mason, for the first time in senior management, a man who's sort of had to deal with his lot in his playing career and had to retire early, and now sort of making those steps into his coaching career. What do you make of them as an opponent for Wednesday night, and what Norwich are going to face?
West Brom are like Norwich, aren't they? In that they are very much sort of when they're in the Championship, you expect them to be up there. You expect them to be contending. You don't, like teams who probably face Norwich, you almost don't have to know that much about them to know that they are going to cause you some sort of problem, however that looks in the Championship. And that is how I feel about West Brom. Going into the game, sort of early on in the season, seeing the fixtures, what I was hoping is that at this point, it would be like this Ryan Mason project that perhaps wasn't working or taking a bit to get going. But clearly, they've produced some results. Would be completely lying if I'd said I'd watched them a whole bunch, seen some highlights here and there. But for me, it's about taking the emphasis. You have to be streetwise. You have to be aware of what's in front of you. But at home, under the lights, in front of a crowd that you need to get back on side, it's all about Norwich City. It's all about how they want to play. The most successful Norwich City teams that we've seen have implemented themselves into games. They've dominated, and domination doesn't just mean possession and hanging onto the ball. It means creating chances. It means scoring goals. And I look at Thorpe versus Farker. Farker's team dominated the ball and scored lots of goals. Thorpe was just sort of score lots of goals, and there were games where they had a bit more of the ball than the opposition. But I remember a lot of games at Carrow Road last season where possession wise there really wasn't much in it, but it was just the volume of quality chances that saw them through, scoring I think the third or fourth most goals in the league last year. And one thing that Thorpe, how they do these behind the scenes videos. One thing that Thorpe said, and it was against Sheffield United in that game at Carrow Road, was he was in the dressing room preaching about how we take the game to them. Like, it doesn't matter who we're playing, and maybe he took this ideology slightly too far and stuck by it a little bit too religiously, but it's about how we want to play, especially at home. Especially at home. It's about Norwich City. It's about what they want to do. And not to completely overlook the quality players that West Brom have, but for me to almost dodge your question, because I don't know too much about West Brom, it's about Norwich City. It's about the print that they leave on the feelings of Norwich City fans after the game.
Yeah, I guess kind of you look at some of the individuals within their squad, they've got a lot of championship experience within that group. The likes of Nat Phillips, the likes of Bielik, Malumbi's played quite a few games. Jed Wallace is obviously an experienced operator. Up front, some dangerous players as well. Josh Madger, I think, is coming back from injury, but yet to score. They've got the lad Hegebo, they spent quite good money on, I think, in the summer. So clearly they've got some different players and different threats that Norwich are going to have to kind of deal with on Wednesday night. Is there sort of any individuals, I guess, that you look at in that group and maybe fear a little bit on Wednesday?
Based on bad juju, I'd go for Jed Wallace. I hate watching him play against Norwich. I don't think he's had loads of standout games, but he's definitely scored at least 3 or 4 against us. He's one of those players, and you can almost apply the logic to their back line as well, like Mepham, Phillips, Bielik, they're just these hard championship players who will kick lumps out of you. They are masters, to quote Tom Cleverley, masters of the dark arts. And it's, most championship teams have those sort of players. And Norwich went for that star, didn't they, under David Wagner? But they are the players that I hate playing against. You've got Ryan Mason as a manager who knows English football, who knows the Championship, from his playing days as well. Wallace is the one for me where I look and think, and then probably Madger as well, in terms of you look at that quality that he showed last season, and it was almost him versus Sainz for a long time, wasn't it, for the race for the Golden Boot. And I just think, it's destined for him to go and grab his first goal of the season against Norwich, isn't it? But yeah, Wallace is the one for me. It's almost, I don't think it's quite as intense as Millwall and how I felt about Millwall, and maybe to a degree Middlesbrough, not so much, because Rob Edwards is probably bang in the middle of Alex Neil and Ryan Mason in terms of ideologies. With Millwall, I was just fearful of little angry Scottish Alex Neil telling his big men to go and kick Norwich. I'm not quite as fearful of that, but I think the opportunity is there for Norwich City to be the better footballing side. Physically, they've shown it. Coventry away is a good example. They've shown that actually they can stand up to the challenge. But I mean, if they're going to go and concede the chances that they have in the last 3 games, then I mean, what's the point of any of it? To be honest with you, Adam.
Yeah, I know we're going to do sort of a derby podcast, more focusing on Sunday's game, but this game, I guess similarly maybe to a few years back where Norwich, I think, played Sheffield Wednesday at home at Carrow Road on the Tuesday or Wednesday night before they made that trip to Portman Road. And that was a spell where they were under a difficult run of form under David Wagner, and maybe his future was being questioned. I know we're in a slightly different stratosphere at the moment in that we're only 7 games into the season, and it's sort of the start of a new project under Liam Manning. It's not quite panned out the way at the moment that fans would want it to. And clearly those questions and problems that we've just dissected quite heavily in this podcast and all the others are there. But how big, I suppose, is Wednesday for that music heading into Sunday's game? Because, we spoke maybe at the start of this conversation there about, maybe how big the result and the performance could be. But it's also setting that precedent ahead of Sunday and maybe getting that Carrow crowd and also those fans maybe making that trip to Portman Road in a good headspace, before that big derby game.
I don't think it will affect it too much unless we go and beat West Brom like 6-0. And we completely dominate them. I really don't think it will affect much. And I don't think that's the worst thing. We know one thing for sure. And, having been to away games ourselves, we know the away following for Norwich is fantastic. We know that those who are brave enough to make that trip on Sunday, as supporters, are going to give it their all. They know, I mean, unless they go and concede 6 in the first 10 minutes, we know for the full 90 that they should be behind Norwich. I don't think the West Brom result or performance necessarily affects that. It almost feels like a banana peel on the road to Portman Road to just try and not trip on. Do you know what I mean? It almost feels like Wednesday is just a way for Norwich City to slip up and maybe make us feel a little bit more negative about the Sunday. But yeah, I'm looking at Sunday as, I don't think it has any correlation to not Sunday. Sorry, I'm looking at Wednesday as something that doesn't particularly correlate to Sunday. I want to just forget about Sunday until the time comes. I'm looking at Wednesday as a chance to, again, it's a copy and paste for the Wrexham game. It's a chance for Norwich City to build off of a point. I'm slightly more positive, ironically, about it than I was for after the Coventry game because of how sort of intense the peppering was. But having seen that goal we've scored, and that one other chance, well, the 2 chances we created, there was one for Sarge as well, wasn't there? I'm looking at Wednesday as a chance for Norwich City to score some goals and to just make me feel a little bit happier, and then Sunday will come and we will experience it, and things will happen, and we will discuss it, and we will see how we feel after it.
Yeah, I can't say I think I'm feeling too positive, but hopefully Wednesday might be able to change that, as you say. If Norwich can put in a positive performance, I'm sure a few fans will be a little bit more up for the derby and feel a little bit more positive. Maybe not, we'll find out. I think with that, we're going to round off this podcast. As we mentioned, we'll have all the build up, I guess, for that game. So do keep it locked to our channels. Thanks for all the support on some of the recent videos, and now the last podcast, I think, has hit a vein and gone down quite well. So we thank you for all the support on that. If you're not already subscribed, of course, hit that subscribe button down below. We'll have all the preview podcast up on the channel later on in the week ahead of that one. But let's focus on West Brom first, and hopefully Norwich City can get their first 3 points on the board at home this season.